You're listening to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast, recorded live on stage in Chicago at the second annual BioCentury Grand Rounds Conference. Grand Rounds US, which seeks to engage thought leaders at the academia-industry interface, has a sister meeting, Grand Rounds Europe, which is in Cambridge in the UK, September 17 to 19. And now, here's your host, BioCentury's Joshua Berlin.
Thank you all for sticking around. And this is our closing plenary podcast where we're going to have takeaways from BioCentury's second Grand Rounds Chicago. My name is Josh Berlin, and I lead corporate alliances and business development for BioCentury. I think I must have missed.
Okay, let's stop. Josh is the maestro behind this whole thing.
Oh, behind that.
So behind the curtain. So let's give him a round of applause.
Yeah, Josh.
And because we all have to run away afterwards, let's do the same for Brian, who's
Brian
somewhere here.
Denker,
Yeah,
our
Brian. Yeah. Thank you. All right. That's how this podcast is going to go, Josh.
I love it. I love it. I think I missed a meeting because I learned I was moderating this podcast just recently, but really honored to do it. And I think if I do half as well as our regular podcast hosts, Jeff Kramer or Stephen Hansen, I'll take it. So we're live here on stage in Chicago, where we're just wrapping up our second Grand Rounds US conference. This is our early stage R&D conference where we focus on the interface between academia and industry and key bottlenecks in translation. We've had 2+ days, I think, a really great debate and discussion here in Chicago. A lot of satellite events as well. Portal Innovations had a great pitch day. Chan Zuckerberg BioHub, great reception. And we'll talk all about that in just a second with a great group here. First off, though, just wanted to thank our regional hosts here in Chicago who have made us feel so welcome, in particular, Michelle Hoffman and Chicago Biomedical Consortium, which chaired the regional host committee. So give her all a hand. So in addition to Michelle on the podcast today, we also have Ed Hodgkin, managing partner of Syncona, based in the UK, and my great BioCentury colleagues. We have Simone Fishburne, our VP and Editor-in-Chief, Karen Tkach-Tudjman, our Director of Biopharma Intelligence, and Salita Koch, our Executive Editor and Head of Intelligence and Research. So let's get started. Let's talk about some of the key findings. Ed, maybe we'll start with you. I know you came in with a lot of expectations about this event, and what did you think? And did we live up to your expectations?
Absolutely loved the event. And it's lived up to expectations, exceeded them. I have to say, actually, the thing that sort of really got me going was the Marty Burke plenary lecture. Of course, I'm a chemist, or was a chemist, and he's a chemist, and he put up chemical structures, and then he was trying really hard to pitch it for a broad audience, but he slipped in a few acronyms that I was pleased to say, as a chemist, I understood what they meant. So at one point he referred to the HOMO-LUMO gap, which is, for the chemist here, it's the highest occupied molecular orbital and the lowest unoccupied molecular orbital. And he didn't explain what that meant. So I thought that was just a great way to start the conference.
Who wouldn't understand what that means?
Any chemist would understand.
No, but who on earth would?
We're all better for it now. Thank you.
But to answer your question, of course. So I sort of came in thinking, were we going to be talking about sort of green shoots of recovery in the biotech world? And I think I realized that probably wasn't the topic of this meeting so much. But I thought sort of a microcosm of that, of course, is sort of the uncertainty in the US around what's going on at FDA and what's happening with federal funding of academic research. And there was a really good panel on the federal funding. And I was actually, honestly, having sort of read about the problems with federal funding, I found it very shocking to speak to people whose funding had been cut off. That was a very personal thing and sort of really hit home, I thought. So that was sort of one of the things. And then I think sort of on the sort of big picture side, something I think a lot about is sort of what's the next big therapeutic area? The innovations in medicines that come to market are driven by breakthroughs in science 20 years earlier. And as sort of early stage investors, we think about where is the science breaking that's going to make the next big medicines. And I'm not sure it came out of it with an answer to that, but there was quite a lot of discussion on that topic. We think a lot about modalities as well, and there was a lot of discussion about modalities here, whether we have a full toolbox. Do we have a toolbox of modalities that solves every problem, or do we need new modalities? And actually, both schools of thought were represented here, and I think they're entirely consistent with each other. So I think we came out thinking we do have a full toolbox. So if you have a new target, you have a modality, you can choose a modality to tackle that target. If, on the other hand, you're trying to optimize the activity against a very well-validated target like CD19 or PD1, or then thinking about new modalities to extract extra value is a smart thing to do. And I guess the final thing I was thinking about is sort of pharma accessing academic innovation, and we had a lot of discussion about that. So.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that, Ed, because one of the things, for me, not just because I moderated it, but was a session with John Sedgwick, who's the SVP of Discovery at AbbVie. And it was a really interesting conversation. And I think there were a lot of threads in there that you guys are going to pick up on as well. And one thing he said, getting into this issue of modalities and targets, and I don't think it was a judgment. I think it was an observation that he made. He said most of the innovation is happening not around new targets, but really about modalities, not even in some cases new modalities, but using the modalities we have, extending them, improving them to be able to deliver on targets that we already know. And I think that's interesting from our point of view at BioCentury for a couple of reasons. We spend a lot of time focusing on new targets, right? We talk about new targets at our conferences, not our conferences, at like ASCO conferences. We talk about first in human. But I think what he was saying is that a lot of the innovation that is making it into pharmas that they care about is actually around, I guess, de-risked targets and making them more accessible. And he was talking about progress in those terms. And I think, you have some comments, right, Michelle, about pharma and what they're looking for.
I always have some comments. Yes. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I think, I just want to take a step back and again, I sit from a slightly different perspective in that my people are the academics that are trying to break through, right? And the way I took this conference, and not in a bad way, but the messages were like, winter has come, right? It is really time to actually start mining the things that we have, right? So there are lots of shots on only a few targets. Right?
Do you mean winter's come from a commercial funding VC point of view, or did you mean the NIH thing?
Both.
No, I agree.
There are two trends colliding here. Yeah. VC is going later stage and facing this shortage of funding from the federal. Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the things that struck me was in both the disease targets as well as the modalities, it was really this, we need more scale. We need more biomarkers to understand disease biology. We need better ways of interrogating when we have these multimodal modalities. We need scale. And at the same time, the funding is going to be much more reduced from the federal level. And so it's very difficult for academic scientists to do that. And yet at the same time, VCs are like, don't come to us until you really understand how this is working. And so the takeaway that I have for my people is that we need to think really much smarter about how to collaborate to get larger data sets that are more convincing for both federal funding as well as VC.
So, the point from AbbVie's SVP was really well taken. And we see that in analyses we've done at BioCentury, right? The swing in deals at the pharma level from, I think, 2023 to 24, comparing 24 to 25, a big swing from more focus on first in class to more focus on best in class. And that makes sense from their perspective. However,
I just want to make the point, first in class, the way we define it, isn't even always a new target.
That's true. That's true. But I guess I want to take the perspective of a patient not currently well served by the handful of targets with extremely well-validated track records. And so that is, for me, endometriosis. So we had a panel on that at this conference, and I think the panelists did a great job of illuminating major bottlenecks to progress there, among them being a way of measuring disease progression of lesion size, right? And so there are a bucket of targets. We talked about prolactin, for example, being part of it. So there are targets that are advancing, but there is new biology that needs to be understood there to even just capture the disease modifying effects. And what I took away from that panel and from several others was, yes, winter is here and we must be lean, like we can't not be lean. However, that doesn't mean you don't do things, but you have to do things really smartly. So Klaus Romero from the Critical Path Institute on the endometriosis panel talked about there's all this endometriosis tissue out there from patients getting surgery. And yes, we should be building biobanks, but that alone doesn't convince because that's an expensive endeavor. So what are the critical questions that if you solve those would unlock drug development that's going on, new drug development, regulator thinking? And so for one of the threads for me across the conference was, in order to do things in this lean and wintry time, you need a very strategic and clear objective about why the thing you want to do unlocks things for multiple stakeholders.
Yeah, Selena, you moderated a couple of panels as well. So what struck you this week? What were some key learnings for you?
I guess I can speak to one of your questions. What's the big next therapeutic area? I mean, we don't know for sure, but I'll shamelessly plug my blood-brain barrier shuttles panel and say that, okay, so delivery to the brain is this long-standing challenge, right? And it hasn't been solved. I wouldn't say these tools are there and validated, but there's this real palpable sense of energy. Like there are so many companies, big and small, working on this problem now that there is a critical mass starting to form. And I think people are starting to feel like it's going to be solved. And once that's solved, you have brain cancer, you have all of psychiatry, you have neurodegeneration, you have epilepsies. There's wide open space there.
I love this vision that John Sedgwick painted, where you have, particularly for like oligos, so genetic targeting medicines, where you can make your drug in 3 months. And if we solve the delivery problem, so we have a way of targeting those therapies to the brain or other organs, you can basically conceive of a drug based on some genetic information. You can make a drug in 3 months and it's going to go to the right place. That is a massive revolution in what we're doing. And of course, it all comes down to the emphasis is all going to be on getting the biology right then and not on the discovering the drug is going to become straightforward. Maybe.
So I want to follow. Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Sorry.
So I just wanted to follow up on something that Karen said, which I violently agree with. And I think I was trying to say in my first comment. And again, this is for all my people out in the audience, right? The academics, is that you are going to have to, and by you, I mean we, are going to have to think about how to break through in biology to do new things, because VC is not going to fund it and pharma is not going to fund it right now. We are the ones that are going to have to do that. And then given all of the constraints, we're going to have to build scale collaboratively, which is something that I like to say all the time, right? So if we think about women's health, for example, what I got, or at least reinforced from this conference, is it's not enough to say I have a new target in women's health. You need to be able to really interrogate the biology. You need to be able to have the right assays. You need to be able to have the right diagnostics, and you need to be able to select the right patients. And that's something, and I think you were trying to, or you did say that, but is that is something that a bench scientist needs to be thinking of as they're trying to push that through. So that is what I took away.
So I want to, close a loop on a couple of threads here, because one of the things that John Sedgwick talked about, he started out in DNAX, right? For people who don't know, that was a very, very research-oriented company. I think he said, 60 out of 100 and something people were postdocs there, and just a really high proportion. And that was a very different model in those days, where just a lot of research could be done. And at some companies like this, that just took ages and ages. They didn't have, Ed, I'm not looking at you like you're nasty or anything, but they didn't have VCs, breathing down their throat. Actually, Syncona has a different model anyway, but they didn't have this pressure that Karen is talking about, where you've got to be so focused. You've got to know exactly what it is. So we're in this this is something actually the ecosystem has to solve for now. And so we're in this world where if you do want to solve let's say, talk about endometriosis and make progress there, the reality is you've got to be super focused. You've got to be like a project manager. You got to, I'm not talking Gantt charts exactly, but you've got to know what your target is. You've got to have your target product profile, which is another thing they talked about. And yet we all know, and we recognized in that other discussion about federal funding, that there is a need for this kind of research that is, what do you call it, blue sky, whatever you want, that is, it's basic, but it's also applied. And there's got to be a solution for that is clearly not going to come in the near term from federal funding. And I do actually just want to say one thing about that panel, because, you did talk about this winter, but a lot of people on that panel said, look, it's bad. Two things can be true at the same time. It's bad, but it's also an opportunity. It's bad, but it wasn't actually that great the way it's structured.
100%.
So let's use this to rebuild something different.
100%.
So I wonder if, go ahead. You go, you're a guest.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things we're seeing more of is big pharma accessing innovation from academia. Now, of course, there has to be a solution to how it's funded in academia. And I think that's driven from pharma, that their discovery organizations have not been as productive as they would like, and they do a lot of deals, of course, to bring products in. But to get to first-in-class biology, you need to go to academic innovation. And actually, there's a recognition, and actually John Sedgwick said this, I think, or maybe one of the other big pharma people here, that they find it difficult to work with academics. There's this sense that the academic loses control and contact with what they've worked on in their life, and it gets thrown over the fence to the pharma. Anyway, so we Syncona have seen an opportunity there. We started a business called Slingshot, and we're partnering with academics that have a great piece of biology. And then we've built a team that is developing a drug based on that biology to the point of being ready for clinic. And at that point, we have two options. We can partner with a pharma company, or we can do a more classic company build where we put a management team and we do a syndicated financing. So, we're venture investors. We think that's a very attractive space to invest right now, actually, even though it's earlier than this clinical stage.
Oh, no, we should talk. Yeah.
Well, that is one of our goals at Grand Rounds, is like put people together. That's a thing.
I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, I think, so number one, yes, I think it is very clear that this is a time for creative destruction. And a very famous Chicagoan said, never let a crisis go to waste. And I think that this really presents us with the opportunity to think differently about how we do research in academia, how it is funded, and what happens to it. And so I think, as Ed said, and Simone, right, you do need to bring some industry rigor in some ways to academia. And at the same time, you can't get rid of the serendipity that makes new discoveries so prevalent. And so I think there's two things. One is that you should keep those parts separately. But the second thing is that when industry works with academia, one of the things that is not happening and that could be happening, and I think that is a theme that I heard, is for the academics to really understand what the problems are, what the bottlenecks are, and that will only come with collaboration as opposed to that pitching of.
So, and that came up today, what I call it like the geekiest part of the Geekchella. So, because today we had panels on enabling tools and technologies, starting with measurement technologies, which is a real strong suit for the Chicago ecosystem, then talking about cancer, multimodal, multi-omic data, and how people are putting all that together for insights. And then our last panel was on quantum computing and the types of problems that can solve in 2 hours that would otherwise take, millions of years.
That was the geek on steroids.
Yeah,
panel,
that was
right?
peak geek. Yes. Yeah. And
5 molar geek.
So I think one of the big takeaways there was around the, someone on the modalities panel used the term platform market or
PDF.
It was platform disease fit. Yeah, PDF. It was really cute. But in general, just the idea that your platform needs to fit. On that same modalities panel, there was an innovator from the local ecosystem, Brad Merrill from UIC, and he was saying how they started out trying to do cell therapy with their very cool kind of sequential CRISPR type innovation. And then speaking with people in the marketplace, realized that their technology would plug into a manufacturing application rather than them trying to develop their own therapeutics pipeline. So today on the panel where they were talking about different innovative ways of making measurement technologies, one of the things that came up was that you really need to speak to the ecosystem about what measurement problems they actually have and offer that fit. And that the path to commercialization, be it through spinning out a company or directly with pharma, really involves sort of knowing your user and getting to know their problems. It doesn't have to dictate the core research engine of what you do, but to create those value generating opportunities, that connection to the pharma partners. And on the pharma BD panel, we heard, that approach them early, approach them often, approach them from across their institutions. And then when you get the no, it's often just not now. And that a lot of them are very willing to give feedback to innovators about what they could be doing differently in their next pitch.
So there was that panel. I really love that panel. Everyone was talking about how hard it is to get their company started, to make the business case, to get the investment. And that just made me wonder, right now, should all of these ideas be their own company? I mean, maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe there is some new model we can dream up that lives under the roof of the institution, but is intermediated, supported by pharma, and has a J&J style intermediate structure to help create that dialogue, to keep things incubated a little bit longer until it's ready.
Ed, do you think there's models in the UK? Like, how do you look at the CRIC or something? Do you think there's models in the UK for that kind of thing? Just for reference.
Yeah, so they have, at the CRIC, they have a sort of core group that does screening and medicinal chemistry and structural work. And then so the academics who have interest in translating their ideas into a product can get started with that central group. I think that's a standout example in the UK. There are some other examples, but that's the leader, I would say.
So I will just make a shameless plug for my favorite person, myself, and say
my favorite person too.
Right? Really? Okay.
Yeah. There's 2 votes you've got.
Awesome. I'm running for world's favorite person. Yeah. So we certainly don't have the resources of the CRIC. But the Chicago Biomedical Consortium, in the last 4 years, as we've been trying to translate things from academia, we really have come across the fact there does need to be an intermediary between academia and a company. And it's not accelerator, it's not an incubator, we literally call it a greenhouse. And the idea is that you can have things in there even before incorporation where you're really putting it through its paces. And you would be able to have connections to more networks of resources, of experts, et cetera. And even when you incorporate, you're still a proto company, right? Like you're still not ready to move on your own. And the advantage for something like that, again, as I think about, we go back to women's health, which is also a passion of mine, being a woman, is that what you can do is not just nurture the technologies, but we think about the ecosystem. This is why the CBC does what we do. And if we have, let's say, the patient population, the people that are working on the diagnostics, the people that are working on the measurements, that type of collaboration could actually flow through this greenhouse, making these technologies not only more robust, but actually investable.
Can I just come back to the sciencey stuff for a minute? I'll ask sort of Selena and Karen, like everybody can answer this actually, but starting with John Sedgwick, we talked about how immunology will almost certainly go in the direction of being molecularly defined, that cancer has gone in. And then, one of the issues that came up with endometriosis. So let's just take a step back and acknowledge, when we set up this, that we thought about the panels for the meeting, we really wanted to do women's health. And we said, well, that's just not a very helpful construct because it's so huge. So let's focus in on one particular disease that is really important. And we decided on endometriosis for a number of great reasons. But coming out of your panel, there was even this idea that endometriosis is badly defined, right? Is it an inflammation disease? So, Selena, Karen, I don't know if you've got comments on that and on where we're going in terms of disease definition.
I mean, it clearly has an inflammatory component, and it immediately becomes much more interesting if you call it an inflammatory disease. But I think
and investable, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think it's one of those things where I do hope biobanking really takes off in this space because, as Serdar Bulun, the professor on the panel who studies endometriosis, was saying, There's a big fibroblast component to this, stromal cells, in addition to the endometrial cells, in addition to the immune cells. And so it needs that kind of atlasing. And here I'll put a plug in for my colleague Danielle, who put out a series of an analysis of what we call atlas studies from our literature monitoring. This is when academics usually will publish these big papers being like, the molecular landscape of blah, blah, blah disease. And they don't usually come to any crisp conclusions, but they've put human data out there. And this is sort of a substrate for perhaps industry and others to work on. And so Danielle did a really nice job profiling a whole host of women's health indications that got this atlas treatment. Endometriosis was sadly not among them. And so I hope that, in a year or two, there will be much more of this substrate of patient sample data, which we know is really the anchor, must be the anchor for new target discovery, new biology discovery, that endometriosis gets that kind of a treatment.
So on this theme of how can the universities support themselves, another interesting thing, and data, what we heard in an earlier panel was that universities are waking up to this idea that they have all this data. They don't necessarily need to make a model and IP protect that and try to license that out. Actually, the data is a treasure trove that is worth a lot and something that could be better leveraged in these times, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Selena just a moment ago said, where are we going next? And it was in the context of the discussion at the event, but we are starting to run out of time. And I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about where Grand Rounds is going to be going next. And we're really thrilled to be launching a European edition of Grand Rounds, which will be September 17th to 19th in Cambridge, UK. Simone, tell us a little bit about that event. And Ed, can you also maybe weigh in on what you're seeing as far as hot topics now in the UK?
Yeah, well, I have actually wanted to bring a BioCentury conference to the UK for a very long time. So now I get to do it. And how fun is that? It's a very vibrant ecosystem, and it very much fits the mold of bringing academics from different parts of, we hope, different parts of the UK and even Europe, America if they weren't, together with global VCs and pharma. So that's the template that we've done. And like we have in Chicago, and like we did last year in Nashville, the focus is really on scientific bottlenecks. That's going to be a constant theme. And we are, together with Selena, Karen, Lauren Martz, others in the team, we're putting together an agenda, and there will be, some parallels to this. So there will be a track on diseases and a track on modalities and a track on enabling modalities. We will have one on obesity. We will have a data angle. And what we try to do also is to tap into the local strength. So I'm going to throw that to Ed in a minute, because we will have a lot of genomics there. A couple of highlights of that. We do have Lord Vallance, everybody. Okay, Lord Vallance. Patrick Vallance, the science minister, will be interviewed by Kate Bingham, Dame Kate Bingham, for those of you who don't know. Got a bunch of sirs on all our panels, and I'll be moderating a fireside chat with Sean Grady, who's the chair of AstraZeneca. We have Steve Jackson doing a keynote talk, and Sarah Teitman from the Wellcome Genomics Institute. So we've really got a stellar lineup. And we've got Ed on top of all that. And you put all those aside, not a lord yet, right? Not a sir yet. But I'll be sending my vote in for that. But Ed.
We're very excited to be involved in it, actually. Really, and I thought, coming to Cambridge is sort of incredibly appropriate, because remember, it's where Watson and Crick figured out the structure of DNA, and it's sort of where the foundational work in antibodies as therapeutics was done, and Cambridge Antibody was founded there, and of course, it's also the home of Sanger, which did a lot of the work on the human genome. So it's that's sort of some of the treasures we have in the area. I thought it's worth just thinking about things that Europeans will look out for at the meeting, what's peculiarly European. And I think it's something that came up at this meeting. Where are the areas where Europe could take the lead? And, if you see already with the UK Biobank, which I think is a leading resource, is there a chance to take advantage of centralized healthcare in this world where big data and AI to extract value from that is going to be increasingly important? Is there a chance for Europe to take the lead there? So I think that could be something that comes up. The other one, I think, which is a sort of ongoing theme for us in the UK and in Europe, is how do we build great European companies that become big players in Europe and employ Europeans and so on? Of course, all of that is built on this wonderful foundation we have of European science. It's every bit the equal of the US science base. What is not the equal is the capital and the experienced management teams and all of that stuff that you need to build biotech companies. So there's a question about how we capture the European science value in European companies. And sort of two parts of that are access to capital. And of course, we rely increasingly on US capital, I think, to come into European companies, and access to people. And I'm wondering whether, with the current situation in the US, is there an opportunity there, you know?
I knew you were going there.
Yeah, so this is September 17th to 19th. Michelle and everyone here in Chicago, I hear there's nonstop flights from O'Hare to Heathrow, so we expect many of you here in the audience to be there. We very much would love to continue the conversation with you, BioCenturyGrandRounds.com. And I'm afraid that's about all the time we have today. I really wanted to thank the live audience for joining us today for this special edition of BioCentury This Week podcast. And many thanks, of course, to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you like today's episode, please leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast so that others can help them find the podcast as well. So thank you all for a great discussion, and thank you to Chicago for hosting us this week.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for BioCentury This Week. The group connects science and technology, professionals, and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.